All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. Website scotthorton.org. You can find all my interview archives there. scotthorton.org/stress for the blog. And I have a stacked police state section today, but this is the biggest and the worst of those. It's by Ali Winston at colorlines.com. From Anaheim to Oakland, police brutality still plagues California. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm all right. How are you doing, Scott?
I'm doing good. Appreciate you joining us today.
No problem.
So this is really something else here. I appreciate sort of the comprehensive take, the encyclopedic list here and explanation of so many cases of police brutality, and in fact the kind of sub-police gangs, the gangs within the police departments that push the very worst of how this stuff goes. So it's really something else. I guess let's start, obviously, with all the big news out of Aneheim in the past couple of weeks. Tell us what's going on there.
So down in Aneheim, there are large portions of the community down there, of the Latino community and others as well, who are outraged at the killings of two young Latino men and the wounding and the third officer involved shooting that happened all within about a week of one another. The shooting that really got everyone's attention was the killing of Manuel Diaz on July 21st. So Manuel Diaz was a 25-year-old from Santa Ana. Anaheim police claimed after the fact that Diaz was a gang member, or a suspected gang member, whatever that means from them. So he was contacted by a group of officers who were assigned to gang suppression around the area where he was shot on Anna Drive. And he ran from contact with them, and they chased him on foot. They fired twice on him, hit him once in the leg and then in the back of the head. And the shooting happened in the middle of the day. There were a lot of people out on the street. And some bystanders got video of the incident, and the video shows Diaz handcuffed Diaz on the ground, bleeding from the back of his head, and the officers are not aiding him at all. They're kind of moving back, establishing a perimeter, and keeping bystanders away from the site.
But that just kind of says it all right there, doesn't it? They shoot him in the head, and then they cuff him.
I will add that no weapon was found on Diaz after the fact. No weapon was found on him whatsoever. There was no accusation that he pointed a weapon at the officers. The account that Anaheim police gave to the media afterwards indicated that the officers believed Diaz was reaching for his waistband, which is a tragically familiar circumstance for the death of young African-American or Latino men who are shot by police. That tends to be a very common phrase.
Well, they do have hands and waistbands, so.
Yes, they do.
And a cop can't always have a drop gun on him, you know?
Well, I mean, there's no indication here that there was a drop weapon involved. 2 nights later, though, when what was his name? When another young man was shot, when Joel Acevedo was shot after a vehicle pursuit, Anaheim police basically claimed that Acevedo was in a stolen car, that the cops pursued him in a vehicle, that he bailed from the car, and that shots were fired at Anaheim police while Acevedo was on foot. They shot him to death, found a handgun next to his body. However, the account was pretty muddied in the initial days after that shooting. There were claims that the shots were fired during the car chase, and then it switched to during the foot chase, so that is also pretty murky. And understandably, there's a lot of public distrust. And most of the anger at Anaheim also stemmed from the reaction of the Anaheim police to protests about these shootings. In the immediate aftermath of Diaz's shooting, people took to the streets and got up in the face of a bunch of police officers in the street. Cops claimed that bottles were thrown at them. They responded by firing lead birdshot wrapped in canvas from shotguns. They fired these what they call drag stabilized beanbag rounds at the crowd, and also used pepper balls on them. And then a police dog was also set on the crowd, and there's a pretty shocking video of this dog tearing at the arm of a young man who's on the ground and fending off the dog with one arm while he's clutching his infant with the other. and it's pretty chilling.
Yeah, wow.
So
just think if that was a scene from, some country where America wanted a regime change, that'd be all over CNN.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, there's a narrative that law enforcement will push regarding these incidents where they say that the suspect was gang-related and that the crowd protesting the shooting was violent and threw bottles or rocks at officers. It's very similar to the circumstances that preceded the pretty infamous deployment of tear gas and other less lethal rounds on October 25th last year during Occupy Oakland protests against a police raid on their camp, in which a former Marine was critically wounded. He was put in a coma by 3 weeks by one of these less lethal rounds.
Right.
So yeah, it's pretty similar in terms of the circumstances.
Yeah, less lethal. I like that. That just means more usable, but dangerous as hell. Yeah, and well now, do you happen to know the good keywords for people to search this video if they have not seen the YouTube? The local news actually covered it and actually showed the whole video, I think, and people can find that on YouTube and judge for themselves whether this crowd, which is mostly mothers and their children, I think. I didn't do a head count or anything like that. Maybe you did, but anybody who thinks that the cops are right, that crowd represented some dangerous mob that threatened their lives, come on.
You just search for Aneheim police dog video. That's as simple as it gets. It'll pop up on YouTube. Yeah,
dog mean German Shepherd, right?
German Shepherd or a Malinois. It was a big, large, aggressive dog that was apparently, the police claim that it escaped from the cruiser that it was being held in, but what I've heard policing experts say in the days afterwards is that dog was out of control. It had poor training. It reflected on the poor training of the officers. It should have been able to, it should not have attacked anybody if it hadn't been commanded to, that it was really out of pocket. And those experts basically made the same comments on the behavior of the Anaheim Police Department. I mean, you're not supposed to cross a human with your firearm. You're not supposed to point your firearm at a human. You're not supposed to level at anybody unless you're planning on using it, or unless they pose a serious threat to you.
Right.
It's even pointing a firearm at someone is defined by law enforcement as a use of force. It's a low-level use of force, but it's a significant threat that you, even if the gun is loaded with a quote less lethal round, unquote, it's still a significant threat of force, and they have to write on it. Those incidents are documented normally. Anaheim police are very tight with their records. They and a bunch of other Southern California police departments will actually refuse to release the names of officers involved in shooting incidents, as well as the names of the suspects involved in shooting incidents, if you file a request under the State Public Records Act law. That is highly unusual, and it could be it's in violation of state law. There was a court decision last year that ruled that the names of officers involved in shooting are public because those individuals are public servants. But
now, you mentioned in your article that in Orange County, this district attorney has actually prosecuted cops before, but in that case, it was the homeless man, and the only reason they prosecuted those cops for murdering him was because his father was a cop.
Well,
so you still have to be one of them to have the protection of the law when it comes to a conflict with them.
Well, main difference here is that the Thomas beating was videotaped. The shooting of Diaz was not videotaped. The aftermath was. The Thomas beating was videotaped. There was, and not once, there were dozens and dozens of accounts of it. The photo of Diaz, of Thomas's body in the hospital afterwards, really, that went around the world. That went viral within hours. And, there was a big difference between the two of these incidents because, most of all, Diaz was a Latino, and Anaheim police had him on paper as a, quote, gang member, so they can make the excuse that their force was justified. That's
all right, I'm sorry, we got to hold it right there. We'll be right back, everybody, with Ali Winston from colorlines.com. From Anaheim to Oakland, police brutality still plagues California. Oh, man. Jeremy Sapienza's Twitter says, Fallujah is like still all mad and whatever. Get over it. Good old Jeremy. Okay, welcome back to the show. Ali Winston writes at colorlines.com. From Anaheim to Oakland, police brutality still plagues California is the latest piece there. And, so let's see. Now I'm trying to remember. Where did we leave off? Oakland somewhere? Oh, no. I know what it was. It was the difference between the videotaped beating of the white son of a cop and the prosecution of the cops that did that, the murder. They beat him to death, compared to this one where they shot the guy in the back of the head as he was running away and then didn't render any aid to him, didn't even try, and then turned on the crowd that assembled watching their war crime. The cops of Anaheim, in this case.
Yep, that's exactly where we were. And one of the things that really disturbed me about the incident was the way that the Anaheim police deployed the next week to meet protesters that came out the following Monday. I mean, they basically deployed out in fatigue gear on APCs, on armored personnel carriers, and fired pretty indiscriminately on people out there, including credentialed media, waving their press passes in their hair and saying, don't fire on us, we're here to document this. One local videographer for a news station actually pulled up to the police line. They didn't know that the street was blockaded, and another TV camera was behind the police lines and basically captured one officer just kind of popping off a few rounds from I think it was like a Remington 307 or something like that, popping off a few beanbag rounds into the windshield of this car. It was pretty spectacular. It really, you could see the overlap of the police and the U.S. military, the increasing overlap of those two in the way that Anaheim PD responded to crowd control that night. It was pretty disturbing.
Yeah. All right, so tell us about the gangs of cops inside the cops in the L.A. County jails.
So most recently, this is actually a pretty long-standing issue. It's not new. It surfaces every, I want to say 5 years, 7 years or so. So in the mid-'90s, there was a bit of a flap caused by the by the uncovering of a few what cops called social clubs, what the deputies called social clubs within the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, including a group that operated out of Linwood Station called the Linwood Vikings, groups like the Regulators, the Nomads. A federal judge actually went so far as to call, and they had their own insignia, they had their own signs, they had their own tattoos, and a federal judge went so far as to call the Vikings in particular, which operate out of Linwood, which is in southeastern Los Angeles County, in what used to be a very white city in the mid 50s and 60s. They, African Americans called it Lily White Linwood, and that was one of the areas which was in constant conflict with a lot of African Americans from South Central back in the 1950s and 60s. The federal judge called the Linwood Vikings a, quote, neo-Nazi supremacist, unquote. And the assistant sheriff for Los Angeles County, the number 2 in the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, the largest law enforcement agency in California, has a tattoo from the Linwood Vikings. He was assigned to Linwood Station in the 80s. He was part of this group. He blew off the judge's concerns. He said, no, they're not. They're a social club. They're not a gang. They don't act like this. Well, so it's 2012 now, and in 2010, there was a brawl at a dinner for off-duty LA County Sheriff's deputies in Montebello. The group that started the brawl it turned out through investigations by the Los Angeles Times that the group that started this brawl was a group of officers known as the 3,000 Boys. It was a clique of officers from the third floor of the county jail that had their own tattoos, had their own gang signs. They threw up, the last 3 fingers on their hands to indicate what their clique was. And they had a system for keeping inmates in line. They'd beat the tar out of them. And that's set off a bunch of outrage, actually there's an ongoing federal investigation into them. And just this past May, the LA Times again revealed the existence of a different set called the Jump Out Boys. The Jump Out Boys are part of the LA County Sheriff's Gang Task Force. So they're not in the jails. They're on the streets. And they have, they value highly aggressive behavior. they have their own tattoos, skull, a flaming skull with red eyes, hand of cards, and a skeletal hand holding a revolver. If the cop who wears this tattoo was involved in a shooting, they tattoo smoke onto the barrel of the revolver. So they actually celebrate officer-involved shootings, and that's the sort of culture that has existed in sections of the L.A. County Sheriff's Department for years, if not decades.
So it's like, I don't know the exact code of it or whatever, but it's like getting a spider web tattoo from being in prison, or the teardrop colored in or not colored in or whatever, signifying whatever crimes you supposedly committed. That's just how the cops are.
Mm-hmm. Well, certain groups of them, yeah. I mean,
whether there's smoke coming out of the barrel of the revolver in the tattoo and that kind of thing. That's great. I like that. It's it has a nice symmetry, right? The cops, I mean, the gangs are basically just acting like cops in the first place, but then the cops that imprison the gangsters, they end up just turning right into them, too, mirroring their behavior. It's like chimpanzees or something.
Yeah, it's really insidious. This is what happens when you try and, when you go on with perpetuating the same cycle of violence and conflict that has been going on with LA gangs and again with the police for, 50 years, 60 years? Since the Second World War. I mean, you have the police department and the street gangs basically mirror one another. And in some cases, there have been instances of deputies in the jail, trafficking controlled substances for these gangs, and in and out of the jail and engaging in this contraband. So the overlap it's really alarming. The fact that there's this kind of culture that it breeds similarity and it breeds aggression and it breeds contempt for life.
Mm-hmm. Well, Murray Rothbard always said the state is just organized crime writ large. So they're really not different in kind, just in the expense of their uniforms or whatever, really.
It brings incidents like this and the kind of systematic refusal of the LA County Sheriff's Department to address, their existence, brings into question the culture that law enforcement agency has created, and whether the folks in charge of the sheriff's department down there really care to root that stuff out. Up north, actually in Oakland, we had a similar group of officers called the Riders that engaged in training day style behavior. One of them actually fled the country. 3 of them were charged and acquitted on hung juries, but the city paid out $10.5 million in civil settlements, and one of them actually fled the country and is still a fugitive down in Mexico. So there's a former cop in Oakland who is on the FBI's wanted list.
Really?
Oh yeah, Frank Vasquez.
Wow.
And that happened back in 2000, 12 years ago. So since 2003, the police department up here has been under a federal consent decree to kind of clean up their culture, but they have not succeeded in doing that. There have been a series of officer-involved shootings up here, or not series, but there's been dozens of them over the past decade that have really raised questions about the department's ability to kind of train their officers to use force appropriately. It is a violent city, and there are a lot of firearms up here. There's a lot of shootings up here as well, but the police have a pretty long-standing rap. They have a pretty bad rap for using force, and that's most recently in evidence with the shooting of this kid, Alan Bluford. He was killed down in East Oakland by an officer who was hired by a former veteran who was hired by Oakland PD while he had an ongoing investigation into a jailhouse beating that he participated in while he was a New York City police officer. So that investigation hadn't closed out, and OPD still hired him. So that's the sort of vetting process they go through.
Mm-hmm.
And, up here there's also another call. There's no evidence that's similar of that sort of gang culture that you have within the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, but at the same time, there are photographs posted, there are flyers posted around the department. One of the mayor up here is Asian American.
The sub-police gangs, kind of the gangs within the police. It's not that they're really different in kind. It just shows how lawless that they are allowed to get. You know, they can spin out as far as they want. They have total immunity and impunity. Do what they want. That's the lesson to me. But, anyway, I'm sorry we're all out of time. Thank you so much for your time on the show. I really appreciate it.
No problem, Scott. Thank you so much.
That's Ali Winston, writing for colorlines.com, and he's also with San Francisco Public Radio, 91.7.